From these silent, mist-shrouded fjords of Norway, a force would rise to reshape the history of Europe. Centuries ago, these calm waters were churned by the keels of the Drakor, the legendary Viking longships. Today, only rusted fragments remain in museums, silent witnesses to the iron will that once forged an empire. But in the 8th century, it was muscle and bone that drove these vessels, battling the unforgiving North Sea. Crafted with terrifying artistry, the dragon heads of their ships were designed to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Imagine this beast crashing through the waves, a harbinger of doom for the coastal villages of Britain and France. Insignificant against the vast ocean, these small fleets carried men driven by desperation, ambition, and the wind. Their eyes were fixed on new horizons, plotting courses to the wealthy, unsuspecting lands of Northumbria. Lindisfarne Priory stands ruinous today, a melancholic monument to the violence that shattered its peace in 793 AD. Back then, it was a sanctuary of learning and prayer, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. Inside, monks preserved knowledge in illuminated manuscripts, believing their isolation was their protection. The Lindisfarne Gospels survive as a testament to the culture that was nearly extinguished by fire and sword. On that fateful day, curiosity turned to confusion as strange sails broke the line of the horizon. From the sea, the monastery was not a holy sight, but a treasure chest waiting to be opened. Driven by the promise of gold, the raiders approached, their intent clear in their wild, adrenaline-fueled stares. The impact was sudden and brutal, the keel grinding into the sand, marking the beginning of the Viking Age. Panic seized the island as the realization of the threat turned peace into pure, unadulterated terror. They surged from the surf, a wave of steel and fury, unlike anything the monks had ever witnessed. Carved stones like this doomsday marker memorialize the armed warriors who brought such devastation to these shores. With speed and ferocity, they charged the holy ground, the darkening sky mirroring the shadow falling over England. The sanctuary was breached, iron axes splintering the oak doors that had stood as guardians of peace. Helpless against the onslaught, the monks could only pray as the deafening sound of destruction drew nearer. The doors gave way, revealing silhouettes of nightmares against the cold light, bringing an end to their world. Chaos consumed the courtyard, a frantic struggle for survival as the raiders cut down anyone in their path. Sacred texts were desecrated, stripped of their gold, the knowledge within deemed worthless compared to the metal. Yet, miracles like the St. Cuthbert Gospel survived, its pristine leather cover hiding the scars of history. Fire completed the destruction, consuming the library and sending centuries of wisdom up in black smoke. From above, the burning island signaled a tragedy that would echo through history, changing Britain forever. With cold indifference, the raiders washed the blood from their weapons, leaving the ruins of faith behind them. News of the raid spread like blood on a map, tracing the terrifying new reality for the coasts of Europe. Scholars like Alcuin of York lamented the unprecedented terror, marking the start of a dark new chapter. Decades passed, the seasons turned, but the Viking threat did not fade. It only grew stronger and more ambitious. By 845 AD, the Seine River in France, now peaceful, was the next target for their insatiable hunger. A massive fleet of 120 ships, led by Regin Horus, rode upstream, an overwhelming force aimed at the heart of Paris. Regin Horus, a figure of legend, stood confident, eyeing the riches of the Frankish kingdom with calculation. King Charles the Bald, young and anxious, faced a tactical nightmare. His forces dangerously divided and outmaneuvered. The Vikings exploited this weakness, isolating the Frankish army, turning the river into a trap. Landing with discipline, they formed a shield wall, A rhythmic, intimidating machine of war, not just a mob. To break the French spirit, they resorted to psychological warfare, displaying their captives in a horrific spectacle. Paris was saved not by steel but by silver. The first Danegeld was paid, a ransom that only promised their return. The Vikings learned a dangerous lesson. The weight of gold was far easier to harvest than the weight of grain. By 865, the raids evolved into invasion. The great heathen army arrived, hundreds of ships darkening the North Sea, led by the terrifying Ivar the Boneless, a man whose physical frailty masked a mind of cruel, strategic genius. They brought horses, transforming from sea-born raiders into a mobile army capable of striking deep inland. York, now a peaceful city, became the center of their new kingdom, its ancient walls witnessing a brutal siege. Under a rain of arrows, the Vikings stormed the Roman gates, claiming the capital of the north for themselves. Fighting through the narrow shambles, the streets of York ran with blood as Northumbria fell to the invaders. But they came to stay. Warriors became settlers, taking homes and making the land their own. Artifacts from Jorvik reveal a life beyond war: shoes, combs, and skates, signs of a thriving community. Trade flourished alongside conquest, the Vikings weaving themselves into the fabric of daily life in England. The Danelaw spread across the map, erasing old kingdoms and stamping the land with Norse names and laws. Only Wessex stood alone. Young Prince Alfred faced the storm, the last hope for an Anglo-Saxon England. At Ashdown in 871, the two armies met. A single thorn tree marked the center of a desperate struggle for survival. With the king in prayer, Alfred took command, his determination sparking the courage needed to face the horde. Leading the charge uphill, the Saxons roared their defiance, meeting the Viking fury head-on. The shield walls collided with visceral impact, a test of strength that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Discipline met frenzy. The Saxon line held firm against the berserkers, turning the tide of the war. Victory at Ashdown gave Wessex hope, but the war was far from won. The Vikings retreated, but they would return. The Alfred jewel remains a symbol of the king who saved his people, a beacon of culture in a time of war. Yet defeat followed victory. Alfred was driven into hiding, a king without a kingdom, reading the signs of doom. In the bleak marshes of Somerset, he plotted his return, surviving in isolation while the Vikings ruled the land. Humbled and hunted, he learned patience, his spirit tested in the fires of a peasant's hut. But the people had not forgotten. At Egbert's Stone, the Fyrd answered his call, an army rising from the woods. At Edington in 878, the shield wall of Wessex stood impenetrable, a fortress of resolve against Guthrum's army. The Vikings charged, crashing against the Saxon defense, a wave breaking against a cliff of determination. Shoulder to shoulder, the Saxons held the line, enduring the hacking axes in a claustrophobic fight for life. The battle raged for hours, turning the ground to bloody mud, a test of endurance under the relentless sun. Finally, the Viking line broke. Alfred led the pursuit, driving the invaders back and securing his kingdom's future. The Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum formalized the peace, drawing a line that would define England for centuries. Guthrum knelt for baptism, a symbolic submission that marked the beginning of integration between the two peoples. England was split, the Danelaw in the north, Wessex in the south. Two kingdoms, one island, uneasily coexisting. In the Danelaw, swords were beaten into plowshares. Vikings settled, farming the land they once raided. Coins bearing both Thor's hammer and the cross reflect the blending of faiths and cultures in this new world. Meanwhile, in France, the Seine River continued to flow past Paris, a city about to face its darkest hour. In 885, a floating city of 700 Viking ships arrived, an invasion force that stretched as far as the eye could see. Rollo, a giant among men, led the siege, his hunger for Paris matched only by his ambition for land. Count Odo rallied the defenders on the walls, preparing to hold the city against impossible odds with fire and stone. The Vikings attacked the bridges, battering rams pounding against the defenses as arrows rained down from above. Desperate, the defenders poured boiling oil onto the attackers, a gruesome curtain of heat to repel the assault. Night brought no relief. The siege fires burned, surrounding the dark silhouette of Paris in a ring of fear. Winter came, freezing the river and the men. For a year, Paris held out, starving but defiant in the cold. Hope arrived with the king's relief army, but victory was snatched away by politics, not battle. King Charles the Fat chose bribery over battle, paying the Vikings to leave, a betrayal that disgusted Count Odo. Laden with silver, the Vikings rode away, mocking the defenders who had fought so bravely to hold them back. But Rollo would return. In 911, he faced Charles the Simple, not as a raider, but as a future ruler. Rollo, scarred and wild, looked upon the French king with amusement, knowing his power lay in his warriors, not titles. Refusing to bow, the ceremony of fealty turned into a farce, highlighting the clash between Viking pride and French court. Upsetting the king literally and figuratively, Rollo's defiance signaled the start of a new era in France. The tension dissolved into laughter, but the deal was struck. The Vikings would stay, but now as protectors. Normandy was born. The land of the Northmen became a permanent fixture on the map of Europe. Rollo's tomb in Rouen stands today, a silent memorial to the Viking who became the first Duke of Normandy. The raiders assimilated, trading axes for swords, adopting Christianity, and becoming the Normans who would conquer England. They became master builders, raising stone castles where wooden forts once stood, fortifying their new duchy. Their coins reflected this refinement, a blend of Viking strength and Frankish administration. By the year 1000, the ships had grown larger, evolved for war on the open seas of the Baltic. King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, a warrior king, stood ready to defend his throne on the deck of his ship. He built the Long Serpent, the most beautiful and formidable ship the Viking world had ever seen. With 34 rowing benches, it was the Titanic of its age, a masterpiece of naval engineering. But a trap was set at Svalder. His enemies lay in wait, converging on the narrow strait to cut him off. Earl Eric watched from the cliffs, waiting for the legendary ship to appear, counting the enemy fleet. When the Long Serpent finally emerged, its colossal size and blood-red sails dominated the seascape. The trap was sprung. Earl Eric smiled, knowing the prize was within his grasp as his men prepared for battle. The Allied fleet swarmed Olaf's ships, turning the sea into a churning white foam of naval warfare. Viking sailors lashed their ships together, creating a massive floating platform for infantry to fight across the decks. Fleets collided with deft and force, prows smashing holes as men leaped across the gaps into the fray. Legendary archer Einar Tambarskielv drew his massive bow, pinning enemies to their masts with deadly precision. But fate broke his bow with a loud crack. "Norway from your hands, king," he famously replied to Olaf. Earl Eirik boarded the Long Serpent, turning the deck into a slaughterhouse as Olaf fought to the stern. Choosing death over capture, King Olaf lifted his shield and leaped into the cold sea, a tragic hero's end. Weighed down by chainmail, he sank into the depths, fading into the darkness and legend. Today, remnants of such battles lie on the seabed, rusted swords telling the stories of kings and conquests. Norway was carved up, and Christianity spread across Scandinavia, marking the end of the old pagan ways. In Ireland, ancient stone crosses stood witness to another pivotal clash in the rolling green hills. High King Brian Boru, old but proud, prayed for victory in his tent, facing the Viking threat in 1014. In Dublin, Citric Silkbird and his mother Gormflaith plotted with mercenaries, weaving a web of political intrigue. The raven banner fluttered, promising victory but death to its bearer, a grim omen for the Vikings. On Good Friday, the armies met at Clontarf. Heavily armored Norsemen faced the numerous Irish forces. Brodor of Man, a sorcerer, brushed aside prophecies of doom, leading the center of the Viking line. The battle was a brutal collision of thrashing machines, a chaotic hacking match in the mud and blood. As the fighting raged, the high tide began to rise behind the Vikings, cutting off their only escape route. Panic set in as the sea swelled. The Viking shield wall was pushed back towards the deadly water. Heavily armored warriors were forced into the deep, struggling to swim, drowning in their own men. Fleeing the slaughter, Brodor stumbled upon the royal tent, finding the elderly king at prayer. In a final act of violence, Brodor felled Brian Boru, screaming his triumph before being captured. The Brian Boru harp remains a symbol of Ireland, a relic of the king who broke Viking power. Viking territories in Ireland shrank, transforming from kingdoms into mere trading ports as their influence waned. 50 years later, the final chapter began. The year was 1066, the twilight of the Viking Age. Harald Hardrada, the thunderbolt of the north, sat on the Norwegian throne, restless for one last conquest. He had once served in the golden warmth of Constantinople, leading the Varangian Guard in a life of luxury. His name is still carved into the marble of the Hagia Sophia, a graffiti tag left by a Viking legend. In September 1066, Hardrada landed in England. Confident, his men left their armor on the ships in the heat. But King Harold Godwinson forced his English army to march north at breakneck speed to meet them. At Stamford Bridge, the Vikings relaxed, unaware that the English army was about to descend upon them. A cloud of dust on the horizon signaled the end of their ease. The shimmer of spears caught the sun. Surprise was total. Unarmored Vikings scrambled for weapons as the English army burst over the hill. The battle focused on a narrow choke point, the wooden bridge spanning the River Derwent. A single colossal berserker stepped onto the bridge, wielding a massive Dane axe to block the English advance. He held the bridge alone, sending English soldiers flying into the river with every swing of his axe. Bodies piled up at his feet. Covered in blood, the berserker taunted the entire English army. Terrified, the English hesitated, no one willing to face the giant on the narrow bridge. But an English soldier floated silently underneath in a barrel, positioning himself below the planks. A spear thrust upward through the wood, piercing the berserker from below, ending his stand in shock. The giant fell, and the English roared, surging across the bridge like a broken dam to crush the Vikings. Seeing the bridge fall, Hardrada entered a berserker rage, cutting through English lines without armor. An arrow spun through the chaotic air, destined to end the life of the last great Viking king. Struck in the throat, the thunderbolt of the north fell, gasping, as the battle noise faded into silence. His banner, the Land Waster, fell into the mud. Hardrada lay dead, marking the end of an era. Refusing surrender, his men formed a shield ring around their king, fighting until the last man fell. Sunset covered the field of bodies. bows circled as the exhausted English collapsed in their victory. A rusted arrowhead remains as a lethal souvenir of the day the Viking invasions of England ended. Of the 300 ships that arrived, only 24 sailed home. The scale of the loss was catastrophic. King Harold watched them leave, weary and aged, knowing another enemy, the Normans, was already landing in the south. Victory at Stamford Bridge was short-lived. Weeks later, Hastings would bring defeat and a new Norman age. Yet, in a twist of history, the Normans were descendants of Vikings. The bloodline had won, even if the culture died. The Viking legacy lives on in our DNA, a genetic map spreading their influence across Europe. Modern faces in York and Normandy still bear the features of their Viking ancestors, a living connection to the past. In Iceland, the Althing at Thingvellir stands as the world's oldest parliament, founded by Viking settlers. Here, chieftains once debated laws on the rocks, establishing a system of justice that echoes today. Our very legal terms, law, outlaw, jury, are gifts from the Norse language, woven into our society. Even our daily words window, egg husband, are Norse echoes spoken in homes around the world. Their ships were engineering marvels, flexible hulls riding the waves like living spines, enabling their voyages. Navigators used sunstones to find the sun in fog, a scientific ingenuity that guided them across open oceans. These crystals acted as a compass, allowing them to push further west than anyone dared before. The map expanded to Iceland, a land of fire and ice, where steam rose from the volcanic earth. Eric the Red, banished for violence, pointed his ship west, sailing into the unknown frozen ocean. Navigating between giant icebergs, his tiny ship reached Greenland, dwarfed by the scale of nature. He named it Greenland, a marketing trick to attract settlers to the grassy fjords of this new world. But the journey didn't end there. Leif Erikson pushed further, into the fog and rough seas of the west. Through the mist, he spotted not ice, but green forests. He had discovered a new continent, North America. Landing in Newfoundland, they saw autumn colors, vibrant red and orange, a sight rare in the frozen north. Today, the ruins at Lance Oma Meadows mark the spot where Vikings built their turf houses in the New World. It was a permanent settlement, with smoke rising from chimneys 500 years before Columbus sailed. Butternut shells found there proved they explored even deeper south, into modern-day New Brunswick. But first contact with indigenous people was tense. Curiosity quickly turned to fear and misunderstanding. A bellowing bull sparked chaos, leading to conflict. The Vikings realized they were vastly outnumbered. Freydis Eiriksdottir famously defended the camp, fierce and pregnant, terrifying the attackers with her resolve. Unable to sustain a war so far from home, they departed Vinland, leaving the American dream behind in smoke. The Vinland sagas recorded the journey to Wineland the Good, a story that waited centuries to be verified. Modern satellites confirm the saga descriptions, proving the Vikings stood on American soil. Leif Erikson stands in Reykjavik today, facing west, honored as the first European to cross the Atlantic.
divorce you! I divorce you! I divorce you!
We remember these stories not with ink on paper, but in the heart, passed from my breath